This lecture today will continue with the Bronze Age, just like we discussed in Mesopotamia and Egypt as well. But this time we're going to move to the Aegean, to the Eastern Mediterranean, in what we call Greece, but Greece in the Bronze Age. Just to make sure you have the geography correct, Egypt is to the south of this region and Mesopotamia to the east. Anatolia on the right is modern day Turkey, and then the rest is on this map is Greece. And once again, the Bronze Age is 3000 to 1000 BC. Near the end of the Bronze Age, the Trojan War would take place, as you can see located on the upper right here of your slide. And the story that stems from that would be an oral tradition that would be passed down for generations and then finally attributed to Homer a few centuries later. But it is a Bronze Age story. Now, in addition to this, the Bronze Age Aegean and it being 3000 to 1000 BC, we have three cultures in it. First of all, on the top of your legend, it says the Cycladic culture in the pinkish red here, the islands, the pinkish red, and they're named after the islands called the Cyclades in the center there, as you can see on the map. Then there's the Minoan culture that's on the southern on the island of Crete here in the orange, and then the Mycenaean culture of the late Bronze Age on the mainland. Let me step back for a minute. With Crete, we will talk about the Middle Bronze Age with its palatial period, and then going backwards a little bit, we'll talk about the early Bronze Age for the Cyclades. Now we'll start with the Cyclades and talk about some figurines that are made there during the early Bronze Age, which we call the Cycladic folded arm figurines. What's interesting about these is they are a type of figurine that is made all over the Cycladic islands in the early Bronze Age. And they all share similar features. They first of all have folded arms, obviously. They are of females with breasts. They have a pubic triangle there, so representing they're a female. And then they have this head that's very sort of flattened and smooth, sometimes tilting back as on the right, sometimes not, as in the example on the left, and just its nose there. And then they stand upon their toes. Now, I'll come back to that aspect of it in a moment. I do want to point out, however, that these figurines were painted. And so they seem very simple and straightforward at the beginning, getting the basic ideas of the human form across to us. They were far more decorative than this. Interestingly enough, that was not known for a long time. And the Cycladic folded arm figurines would have a great impact on art of the early 20th century. And they were appreciated for their undecorated aspect of them, and just the simplicity of the form. What's interesting about them is that though almost every Cycladic island has these figurines in their archaeological remains, each island has a different type, which is quite interesting. You don't have to know the different types, but you can see between the two here, the one on the left and the right, one of the big things is the extent to which the knees are folded, the stomach is sticking out, the head is tilting back. But one interesting aspect of them all as well is that they are on their tippy toes, even though there's regional styles. So what's curious about that is they could not stand on their own. Now, some of these are figurines, so they're small statues, but some of them are quite large, 4 or 5 feet tall. And if they can't stand on their own, it suggests that they were carried, and perhaps in some sort of procession. The uh, the analogy I like to use is that frequently in many countries there are parades for the Virgin Mary. And but in every country, there's their own particular style of the Virgin Mary. She has her basic, iconographic features, but stylistically they change from one country to the next, or one culture to the next. And perhaps that's what's going on with the Slavonic folded arm figurines, that they represent some sort of perhaps deity or something, and a concept that's important, that they all share. However, they have their own variations on them. These have become extraordinarily popular. Once, as I said before, they're made out of a wonderfully brilliant white marble that comes from the Cycladic Islands. And we should also notice the difference in these figurines from the ones, for example, we saw in the Ice Ages, where they're not heavy. They're not large figured, but they're very thin figured. And so we see an aspect of feminine beauty changes. It's, what's idealized of the female form changes over time and from culture to culture. Interestingly, there are a few male figurines, but they are not folded arm types, and they are usually seated and playing an instrument, a large harp. What does the folded arm represent? We really are not certain. But these have become sort of the archetypal piece of art for of the Cycladic Islands from 3000 to 2000 BC. But then when we move into the Middle Bronze Age, we can move down to the island of Crete, to Knossos, and we start to see palatial structures in the Middle Bronze Age dating from around 2000 to 1500. I'm rounding these dates off a lot for the purposes of this class. My colleagues would tell me that that's not exactly right. By the way, I should add, this is the Aegean is what I specialize in, the Aegean, the prehistory of Greece. I've worked, for example, at this site, Knossos. Knossos, you might be familiar with from the Greek myth. It is associated with the myth of Theseus, the Athenian prince, and the evil king of Knossos and of the Minoans, a guy by the name of King Minos. In fact, I shouldn't say Minoans because that's the name we gave to the culture later on, much later on, because of King Minos. But we do know that Knossos was the main palace of the island. There are other palaces on the island, but this is by far the largest and in the central northern part of the island. Now, before we start talking about its excavations and that occurred in the middle of the 19th century, or late 19th century and early 20th century by Arthur Evans, let's talk briefly about the myth. And the myth was that King Minos was in control of all the seas. And he demanded from all the cities that were under his control a tribute every year. And that tribute was one of their young virgins. This could be male or female, to be brought down to Knossos and released into a labyrinth. Now, labyrinth is actually a Bronze Age Greek word. Inthos is room, and labers means the room of the double axes. You don't have to know that, but I do want you to know that the idea that a labyrinth means a maze-like structure literally comes from the mythology surrounding the island. So he would demand this tribute, and then they would be brought down to Knossos, and they would be released into a maze, a labyrinth. And in that labyrinth, there was a bull-headed human that would kill the offering. Theseus comes in and is befriended and falls in love with the daughter of King Minos, a woman by the name of Ariadne. She gives him a sword and a ball of string. So when he's released into the labyrinth, he will be able to find his way out by leaving the string, along the way. And with the sword, he kills the Minotaur, gets out, and he and Ariadne escape, and he returns back to Athens. There are some, more details to this story. It's more elaborate, but for our purposes, we'll stick with that bare theme. Now, a gentleman by the name of Arthur Evans, a British man whose father actually was a pretty big archaeologist, comes to Crete, actually around precisely 1899, I think, 1898 or 99. And he goes to Knossos, which, by the way, its location was never unknown. There's still a modern village nearby. It just was unexcavated. He would excavate the site, and he would find this plan. And it has a central court going north to south, oriented north-south, as other Minoan palaces would have. And then this complex series of rooms all around that. And so we can see by the complex nature of the architecture that, it could be conceived as a labyrinth or a maze of some sort. It's certainly a lot more elaborate than any architecture that was used prior to this. And here we see a reconstruction of it. To the upper right is the north. That's how you would enter the palace, and that would lead you into the central court. And the central court around it has a throne room, and then many, many, many other administrative rooms. It's a fairly large structure, multi-storied buildings with spiral staircases, etc. But also with many frescoes. Just to clarify to everybody what a fresco precisely is, because we'll see more of them, it's the practice of putting white plaster onto a wall and then having dyed plaster in reds or blues or what have you, and then applying that to the plaster while it's still wet. So the bond between them gets intertwined so much that it's permanent. And here we see the very famous Toreador fresco, one you're going to need to know. And it shows a male leaping over a galloping bull. I want to point out that the stance of the galloping bull is called a flying gallop. And with its all four, arms and legs stretched out, or legs, I just should say, showing that it is in motion and it's running. People of the Aegean would follow the Cretans. The Cretans would follow the Egyptians with the idea that women were in white and men were in reddish brown. So we see here there's a man sort of leaping over it, and then there are women on each side, perhaps sort of like rodeo clowns to take the bull's mind off the person that's about to leap over them. Strangely enough, these white skinned figures, which should represent females, have kilts on them with cod pieces to make them seem like males. So it's uncertain what's going on here. But we see the idea of the bull as being prominent in iconography in the Minoan culture, and this is where we learned about the labyrinth and King Minos, etc. So it seems that bull leaping was a very popular sport at the time, and it's remained so throughout history in the Mediterranean. Perhaps you're familiar with the running of the bulls of Pamplona, where young men try to show their bravery by running the head of charging bulls. Or here we can see a wonderful acrobat doing a somersault over from one side to another of a bull. So this sort of entertainment has continued on, and indeed there's straight out bull fighting. So be familiar with that Toreador fresco. It introduces us to the concept of these frescoes, that they are also maintaining some of the Egyptian traditions. They obviously had been there, but they adapted them to their own way of life. And I'll come back as we talk about more frescoes in the Aegean and talk about some general themes that we can apply to these frescoes. We turn now up to the Cyclades and to an island called Santorini or Thera, and the archaeological site of it on it called Akrotiri, which is on the very southern lowest part of the island. You can see a photograph of it in the bottom center here. Santorini is the ancient is the Pompeii of the Aegean world. It's a big volcanic island with the center of it blown out. And this archaeological site that dates to the Bronze Age was covered over with the ashes, and it was excavated in the 1960s, and where wonderful frescoes like the Boxing Boy Boxing Boys, I'll come back to in a moment, show here on the upper right. If you ever have a chance to go to Greece and go to the Cyclades, you want to go to Santorini, or also known as Thera. Santorini is the Italian name, Thera the Greek name. Here's a shot of the island with a colleague of mine, Floyd McCoy, who's basically the world's leading specialist on this volcanic eruption, teaches at the University of Ohio. I'm sorry, University of Hawaii, I'm sorry. What I want to point out there is off in the distance, though, across from him, you see that white top level. That's the Minoan ash that was a result of the eruption around 1600 BC. On the lower right, we can see also layers below it of various colors. Now, to give you an idea of this eruption, here it is, the ash that came from it, and look at the size of those buildings on top. It's an extraordinarily thick layer of ash, and they now think it's this eruption was even larger than the 19th century eruption of Krakatoa, which was a major eruption, and it changed the whole climate of the planet for a while. And we can see how much ash is deposited here. It's been quarried out in modern times for other materials. And then there's the archaeological site that was found there. The stories vary of how it was found, by accident or by erosion. Excavated in the 1960s, and has since been covered over. And we just have this wonderful archaeological site that you can literally walk down the streets of. If any of you have had a chance to go to Pompeii, you've had that experience of walking through an ancient Roman city. Well, this is about 1,500 years older than that. And we can see the stairwells that collapsed. One thing that's interesting about this site, unlike Pompeii, is that it seems as if the people knew the eruption was coming, because there was no skeletons found at the site. And there wasn't that much many wealthy objects left behind, like gold, etc. Some have been found buried below floors, but a lot of it is missing. And so we didn't find a lot, so we think that the people knew what was happening and left. But it's still preserved for us, the architecture and the wall paintings. And here's just another shot of it. It's very similar to what we saw before, with these new pylons coming up and the architecture going in between. Now, the best thing about this, like Pompeii, interestingly enough, same thing happens where the wall paintings there are preserved. We have more frescoes from this site than any other archaeological site of contemporary date. And it's because it was preserved by the eruption. And so here we have a couple of them here. We see a couple boys boxing on the left, and then we see on the right a young man holding some fish that he presumably has just caught. They are, reddish brown and signifying that they indeed are males. They have these strange haircuts where parts of their heads are shaven. And we're not sure what that means, but it occurs with females as well, but only young females and primarily only sort of young men as well. And it seems that these haircuts represent age groupings, and that the older males and females are shown with with a full head of hair, and where it's blue on the skulls, that is where it's been shaved off. And so we see here a couple young boys boxing here, sort of weird, sort of bend at their stomachs, where they wear these belts. And then shown in profile, notice that the eyes are still sort of frontal eyes that are pasted on the side of the head, and they swing at each other here. Some kids having fun. On the right, we see a man fishing, or having already fished, showing his catch. Interestingly enough, the fish are well enough painted that people who specialize in fish can identify the species. But we see that here the man is fairly simplistically shown. Profile legs, frontal torso, profile head. But the interesting thing is here is that these paintings are house paintings. These are not propaganda like we saw with most of the art from Mesopotamia or Egypt. These are just showing sort of daily scenes of life, sort of charming scenes of what people do. But it's not to send a message of power or control of any means. Another interesting fresco, which is fragmentary, shows a woman on the sort of center right, a large woman seated on a throne, and behind her is a griffin. And in front of her is a blue monkey that's bringing up offerings that we believe to be saffron. And then behind him is a woman carrying saffron, which seems to be floating in this flat background, has collected it and is and pouring it into a basket, and that this saffron was an offering to some sort of female deity shown on the right. And crazily enough, blue monkeys were intermediaries in between what we believe to be the human and the deity on the right, doing human things. We don't have time to talk too much about this, but in the Aegean, but blue monkeys occur in other frescoes, and indeed they're a type of monkey that exists in sub-Saharan Africa, and somehow were brought to the Aegean. So this seems to be a religious act, and saffron seems to have some importance in the society. Notice that the woman's hair on the left, even though she still has a little ponytail there, she has a full head of hair, as does the woman on the right. So we think this might be some sort of religious ceremony. But just to point out these saffron gatherers, this is a woman. She's not in the last image, but is shown here facing to the left, her head shaved with just her one little ponytail. And then her dress with the top is an open bodice. And then she wears what's called a flounced skirt. And we'll see, we won't see more of these, but it's a very expensive type of dress with one layer over another layer over another layer. And textiles were worth a lot of money at the time. And so she's very expensively, dressed there. And she has a charming face with lipstick and these big looped earrings. Crazy enough that these earrings are only shown on frescoes on this island. We're not sure exactly why that is. But we see here, a fairly well-presented young woman. Once again, notice the white skin, also indicating her gender. What precisely these paintings mean, we're not sure. I should have said also that the whole version of this fresco is, very, very large. It would, easily take up the size of one of our classrooms. And so they were, full wall paintings. And once again, they have to be painted quick because the plaster was drying. So we believe that there was perhaps several artists at one time sort of coming in and doing these paintings. So we had the early Cycladic figurines, and in the Middle Bronze Age, the area was in control, we believe, by the Cretans or the Minoans. This site was occupied near the end of the Middle Bronze Age and well into what's called the Late Bronze Age, for our purposes around 1500 to 1000 BC. And we believe the Trojan War took place around 1100 to 1200 BC, and it was between the people of Troy in Anatolia, modern Turkey, and the people of the Greeks who fought under the auspices of King Agamemnon, the king of the Empire of Mycenae, which is this large citadel on the mainland. So it seems that power had shifted from the island of Crete up to the mainland in the Late Bronze Age. By the way, I say Greeks. Homer never refers to them as Greeks, nor do the characters in the stories refer to them as such. They refer to themselves as Hellenes or Achaeans. The word Greek doesn't come about till a bit later. And Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, and he would demand that other kings, like King Odysseus of Ithaca, come and fight with him to avenge his younger brother's the crime committed against his younger brother, namely that a prince of Troy had absconded with his lovely wife Helen. And so the Homeric epics deal with that Trojan War, which I hope and I hope you've read both the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is about one part of the Trojan War. The Odyssey is about Odysseus, one of the Hellene or Greek generals trying to get back home. Wonderful myths and stories and epic stories that we continue to teach this very day, and I hope you've all had a chance to read at least one of them. Now let's go to this plan of the site. It's on a hill. It has an entrance on the bottom here with large protective walls that we call Cyclopean masonry. I'll show you a close-up in a moment. It's called that because it was given that name by the ancients, actually, because the walls were so large they thought only the mythological giant, the Cyclops, could have possibly built them. We go in through this gate at the bottom of the slide here, and immediately to your right is a circular structure. That's called a grave circle, and we'll look at some discoveries that were made in these graves. We believe them to be graves of kings, etc. Buried at the entrance to show who was in charge here. And then you would climb up the citadel and make it to the main megaron, or the main palatial structure at the top of the hill. But let's go back to our gate on the bottom here. And notice that the wall, as it comes from the right, juts out a little bit and then shoots back for the gate and then juts back out and then continues its circuit around the city. And this is a defensive gate. It's to help protect against anybody trying to break through this gate here, which we call the Lion Gate because of the relief sculpture above the gate of two lions facing a column. I'll come back to that in a moment. What I want to point out here is, first of all, we have architecturally speaking, we have our post and lintel structure once again for the entrance. These are huge posts and lintels, by the way. The lintel block sort of curves to the right and left to release the thrust or the weight coming from above it. And then those Cyclopean blocks to the right and left of the gate. Notice how huge they are in comparison to the people. And they have no cementing agent in between these blocks. They just sit there by pure weight that they are secured. And you would go underneath this gate, and you would see two lions facing a column. We know they're lions, by the way, because the ancients, the heads were still there in antiquity, and the ancients recorded them as such. Now they look at this column. There's no way you could know this because we haven't gone into this much detail, but take my word for it. That column is the type of column that's used on Crete by the Minoans. And we believe the Mycenaeans had conquered the Cretans, And here in this relief sculpture at the entrance of the Palace of Mycenae, they're showing that they defeated them. And indeed, the Minoan columns are wider on the top as they are on the bottom, or wider than they are on the bottom. And then it sits upon what are called two Minoan altars. Please just take my word for that. We don't have time to get into such fine detail, but we've found real examples of those type of altars. And so we believe this symmetrical design here is to show that they had conquered the Minoans. And in fact, Minoan artifacts are found at this site. We'll step back a little bit to get a better view of the whole gate on the left as it is now, and on the right as it's reconstructed. Now the purpose here was that, especially with the wall of the right, is that you could line these with soldiers. So if an army tried to attack, let's say with a battering ram or something, you could shoot down from both the left and the right. And soldiers could only carry shields on one side of their body. So this was a very useful defensive gate, and one that would be used, quite frankly, throughout history by later cultures as a good way to defending an entrance. Leading up to the site are a series of tumulus graves that we call tholos tombs. They are simply just round, domed rooms covered with dirt and these impressive entranceways to them with these large cyclopean blocks. And just to give you an idea of how large those blocks are, here's a shot of me in front of one of these graves. I want to point out here a really important concept that we've already seen at the Lion Gate, but it's clear here, is that above the gate is what's called a relieving triangle. And that is constructed by what's called corbelled vaulting. It's not true vaulting with a true arch, but it's one stone packed on top of another stone, sort of leaning out just a little bit farther. So they can make this triangle. And what it does is it pushes the thrust over the, what should be columns here, here on the left and the right, and the lintel block in the center has no weight on it. At the Lion Gate, the stone that was put in the relieving triangle is very light steatite, so it didn't put too much stress on the lintel block. And here we see these used for these huge tombs that were all robbed in antiquity, by the way. This is what they're like inside. We can see they are a large dome structure. Look at the size of that lintel block on the interior of it. It's called the Treasury of Atreus because the excavator got it wrong and thought it was a treasury, but it's nothing close to it. It's just a tomb that has been robbed. And here's another shot of the interior. Once again, look at the large lintel block there. And then when you look up to the top, we can see how on the right-hand side, we can see how the dome finishes off. It's not a true dome, as we will see with the Romans, but it's not bad. And it's not a true arch, but a false arch, and it's called corbelled vaulting, which is on your handout, and you need to know that term if you discuss this structure. Here we see a plan of the structure as well, just to give you an idea of it. And here is a cutaway shot of it, with people walking into it to give you an idea of just how grand and large these burials were. Now they show people walking into it as if to be able to see these things, but in fact the entranceways were covered over. Now to come back to all this and go back to our sort of first relieving triangle that we saw at the Lion Gate, I'll just show you some details of this. Once again, those are those Minoan altars that I mentioned before. And on the right here, you just see the feet going, sticking out from the altar in very sort of shallow relief there. Work has been done on how this was actually constructed. Recent work by a guy by the name of Nick Blackwell, a very interesting discussion of the use of the pendulum saw to carve it out. And then he has looked at all the marks on the structure, on the building, on the sculpture, to see how it was things were attached to it. Interestingly enough, there's another lion gate at a place called Boazkoi, the capital of the Hittites, uh, which we can see on the right in the Hittite Empire. So we believe that the Mycenaean one reconstructed here on the left is a copy of that. Back to our grave circle. You go in through that lion gate. You see this large grave circle on the right, immediately to your right, and you can walk around and see the gravestones as you could in antiquity. And in one of them was found the very famous lion hunt dagger, which is shown on the bottom here. The handles are missing, but the dagger on the bottom we're going to concentrate on, and it shows the lion hunt here with 5 men hunting 3 lions, and with their large shields, and one man has fallen chasing the lions. On the bottom, we see 4 lions hunting 3 stags. So it's a circle of life that is shown here. And here's a nice detail of this great work.